about it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to say, oh, thanks for all your time and effort. Yes, well, if I were to go to SL, they'll go, oh, you worked this. They will pay you for your time and effort. Usually doesn't do that. They're like, oh, you're changing jobs. It's really not just
too
like
bad.
that. I know.
It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
All right, Alan, remind me what I need
But-
to do.
Always higher.
Alan,
What is?
Always higher.
there's
I know, I
something on YouTube, right?
I haven't looked for a minute.
All right,
I feel bad because I need.
all right, commissioners, I think we're live on YouTube.
Ready?
Well, we got to wait for me.
A couple of. That's what I work on.
Make sure Marie's good to go here. You good, Marie? Okay, we can go ahead and get ready whenever you guys are ready.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to North Logan Planning Commission meeting on December 14th, 2023. Happy to see everybody here. We're not missing Heron. Hopefully he'll show up in a little bit. We will begin with a pledge of allegiance by Heather and a prayer by Teresa.
Okay. Repeat after me, or together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful this night to join together to discuss issues of North Logan City. We're grateful for this time of year. We're grateful that we could live in a beautiful part of thy world. We ask you that might help us, that we might be able to have good discussion and be able to make decisions that would be best for those that we serve. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you. We need to have a motion to adopt the agenda tonight. Anybody?
So moved.
Gavin moved
A second.
and Heather second to adopt the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We'll move on. We also, hopefully you all read the minutes of August 17th that Marie sent out. So we need to have a motion to approve those minutes.
I so move. Second.
All right, it's been moved by Kenny and seconded by Gavin to accept the minutes for August 17th, 2023. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We'll move right on. Scott, any follow-up issues from whenever was our previous
Been a
meeting?
minute, hasn't it? No, I don't have anything else to follow up with you guys on.
All right. Then we will move right on to item number 1. It's a public hearing. Review and possible recommendation regarding a proposed amendment to the Smiling H subdivision development agreement to allow for slightly reduced side yard setbacks. Do we need to discuss this a little bit before we open up?
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick overview. We can go through the staff report in as much detail as you'd like, but we do have the applicant here with us, and they'd be happy to describe what it is they're looking for and why they're here requesting this amendment. But just so that the planning commission and the public understand, there is a hearing on this because it is an amendment to a development agreement that would allow for an alternative standard from what is traditionally required under the underlying zoning. So the zoning under this subdivision is R112. It traditionally requires a 10-foot setback minimum on one side and at least a 15-foot on the other. In this particular subdivision, it's what we call density determinant, which allows for some lots to be smaller, some lots to be bigger. So it allows for a 24-foot combined side yard setback. So a minimum of 10 and then 14 on the other side. What the applicant is looking for is a slight reduction down to a 20-foot combined side yard setback. So it's a reduction of 4 feet total between the two sides. And the intention here is to allow for alternative footprints, floor plans, configurations to fit better what they're looking to do. So happy to go into more detail, but because we are potentially changing their development agreement with an alternative requirement, it does require a legislative process. So Planning Commission considers it. opens it up for public consideration and hearing. You would make a recommendation, whether positive, negative, or neutral, or with conditions, you could make a recommendation, and then you could pass it to the city council for them as the land use authority to potentially adopt or approve the proposed amendment. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking to do here. Be happy to turn it over to the applicant to describe what they're looking to do. We have some exhibits in the staff report we can pull up to help visually communicate the intent, but happy to lead that discussion however the commission feels necessary.
Why don't you lead that discussion, Scott, and you guys can chime in, but we'd like to see
Yeah, go ahead.
everything you've got. Hopefully everybody has read through this, but we'd like you to go through it with us, Scott, please.
Yep. Jake, if there's anything in the staff report that you'd like for me to pull up.
Yeah,
let me know.
that'd be great. Let's go ahead. I got it on my computer here so I can tell you. Why don't we go down to Exhibit A, which is
This is the preliminary plat for the overall Smiling Beach
that's- I think it's
subdivision.
page 8. Yeah, so just as a reminder, this is where Smiling H Ranch is, right here next door, just east of us up the street on 2500 North. So just a reminder where that subdivision is. We can go to the next one. Also, there's the plat, currently working on phase 1, which is on the south side. And
Yeah, and this is the plat that is nearing recordation, so this should record any day now. In this configuration, the south side of 2500 North is the phase going first.
correct, thank you. And Brent is with me, by the way, and he can chime in at any point as well. Feel free, Brent. Okay, go along this Exhibit C. Oh, we don't, that's just information.
That's just the application there. This is
yeah.
the actual.
Okay, so here is the development agreement. Go over the language of what we're requesting, go to the red. So the purpose of our request is to have a little bit more flexibility with architecture and building types. Currently, the side yard setbacks total maximum is 24 feet. And our home designer has found that with an extra 4 feet, doesn't seem like a whole lot, but with 4 feet, we can do accessory dwelling units on the side. And also, or we could do third car garages, which are quite common and requested. This development is more of a mid-level development. It's not necessarily starter homes, but it's also not necessarily the high end that you have up on the foothills in some of those areas. And so in this price range, there'll be a lot of homes that will want either that ADU or the garage, the third car garage. The nice thing about the side loaded ADU, it's not as common, but I'm really excited about it because it goes on the other side of the garage. So for a lot of people having an accessory dwelling unit, they worry about privacy. They want it to be a little bit separate. And so it goes on the other side of the garage. So there's really minimal disruption to the home. We do have an example
Probably the best one right here, right?
right here. So there it is. So in place of a third car, accessory dwelling unit right there, one bedroom. It offers a second income opportunity, offers opportunity for a family that can barely financially get into the home, but then they can use that rent to help them. A great mother-in-law place, or your mother as well, living there. Older kids. Right now, a lot of older family or older adults, older, younger, however you want to say it, are staying at home while they're saving money to buy homes and things like that. So offers a lot of flexibility there. This is going to be standard option on all homes, meaning you go in and you pick a floor plan, you can add it or not, as long as it fits on the lot. So it is not yes or no, I got to have that. It's you can add it during that design process. And then also the opportunity with the third car garage. And right now with people having bikes, toys, RVs, all kinds of, well, not RVs, they don't fit in there, but all kinds of different toys and things. Third car is pretty common these days. And something that's really requested in this market. And so, and this home, actually, the Edgeworth, this is going to be the model home. And I'll let them sign in.
Oh, you have to put your password in to sign this out. Yeah, just-
It's Scott is number one. That's the password.
Password one.
I saw Alan type it in
I was gonna have to reset it though.
Heather shared it.
It just said it on public record.
Everyone knows the city.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh, there we are. So the Edgeworth is actually going to be the model home, and it's going to be the side loaded garage too. Talked to the owner last night. He's really excited about it. It's going to be this building with an actual a rustic style. So a little bit darker wood, a little bit more mountain look, but that'll be the model home with the side loaded garage. And the purpose is to really push that architecture. I mean, garages are not the most beautiful thing in the world. And so that's where we want to turn it to the side and really focus on the architecture of the home. But if we could go through the different floor plans real quick, just thought I'd mention these 5 floor plans are ones that are going to push the most. There's a bunch more that are optional. And with all of them, you can do a side loaded garage as well as the front loaded. They also come with the ADU, as I mentioned, different colors, different styles. There's just a lot of different things in it. There's more of a modern one with the Denford. Then the Northfield. I really like this one. I think it's very classy. And then the Northfield as well. And I like that one too. It's especially good looking with the side loaded. And then it has these doors that kind of that wood material and windows.
I think that's the last
Okay,
example.
great. And we can go back to the red text on the development agreement. So this is what we're requesting. And the first part, explains that North Logan City's ordinance allows for a legislative change to zoning setbacks. And so with the planning commission review and a city council recommendation, setbacks can be altered legally. You don't have to change the whole entire code for the whole city, but you can do that through development agreement. My understanding is you're currently doing that with Walmart for the sign coming into the city. And so, again, that's what the current ordinance says, is that it's combined 24 on the two sides together, 10 and plus 10. And then what we're requesting is a minimum of 8 and then 20 together. So, it could be 8 and 12 or 9 and 11 or something like that. That'll allow for some flexibility. And Scott was really helpful on this. Originally, we looked at just 10 and 10, and he thought, you might want a little bit more on one side where someone might back a boat in or some toys or a little bit, and you'll see those examples in the report, and that was really helpful.
Mhm.
Yes, so that's a crux of the proposal, right, Jake, is going down to an 8 and a 12 or a 20-foot combined side yard is the intent here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty common in cities to have lesser setbacks like this. Scott provided some examples from Harriman. Recently, Weber County for unincorporated went down to 5 and 10. So even a little bit less. So there is quite a few cities out there that have a little bit less. The side yard is real. You just want to walk to the back right, and building code is 6 feet from building to building for fire. That's just kind of standard building code for everywhere. And so just a mention of what type of home we're going for, the mid-level price point, something really nice for the city in this area. And then this is something that we're recommending, that the developer to maintain a 2-foot setback on that third car. So that way you don't have a flat front. We want to break up that facade and push that fenestration back a little bit. And at least a lot of our examples are 5 feet or more, especially with the ADU and some of those other ones. but a minimum of 2, and that really breaks it up and pushes it back and avoids that wall. And then number 20, there we want to encourage ADUs. It provides housing. It's a very single family friendly housing, family oriented. I did research like statewide on accessory dwelling units, so I'm kind of a fan. And we found that most ADUs rent to family members or acquaintances, and then a smaller percentage to strangers or someone else. And so a lot of times they are renting to family and friends, and so it is kind of a very family kind of thing. So okay, I think that is it.
If you guys have any questions on the intent, what is being requested, we can get into the staff report and talk about some of the points of consideration, but do you guys have any questions as to what the red line is asking for?
I just have a question. So you're not changing the size of the lots as they were approved. You're just making it so there can be different house plans on those lots, correct?
Correct. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. No more units, no more homes. Not changing even lot sizes. The plat is the same. It's just allowing homes to go a little bit wider in some cases.
I actually had a similar question, but maybe going a different angle. I understand the desire to provide the option for a third car garage or the ADU. But could that not also be achieved by increasing the lot size slightly without having to make the exception to the allowed setbacks?
We're at a point where we're ready to sign the plat. Like it's really close. It probably will happen in January. And by making the lots wider, then of course we would lose lots or change things. So that's a monumental change is messing with the lot sizes and all of that.
Kenny,
because-
to further answer that question, there's actually the subdivision just to the west of this. Let me just show you. So here's the city office, right? Here's where we are at right now. Here's where Smiling H is going to be. This is phase 2. Phase 1 will go first. In this particular subdivision, Aspen Meadows, this is back in the day, it was a PUD. Many of these lots are at 80 feet in width. And a lot of them do not, most don't have a third car garage. So you could put 3-car garages on an 80-foot wide lot, but then you would have primarily garage doors running out on the street. You'd have less opportunity for architectural, human element architectural components to be facing the street. It'd be more auto-centric. I've kind of touched on that in the staff report. 80 feet's wide enough. It just doesn't allow for quite the variety of floor plans and architectural variety, so to speak. There are a couple in this subdivision, mostly back on some of these cul-de-sac lots where they open up towards the rear of the lot where they can fit a 3rd-car garage in. So long story short, I mean, 80 feet it's not a narrow lot by many standards, but it's not a wide lot either. And so that's where those 4 extra feet could facilitate a 3rd-car garage or a side ADU without having to totally go to, just a very garage door heavy architectural style, which I've touched on in the staff report. We talked about some of the concerns. I was trying to anticipate, what would this change do to the character, and how is this potentially impactful to the overall outcome, whether it's intended or unintended. And I provided some examples in the staff report of what in planning lingo is a snout house. And this is common, especially in expansionism, post-World War II, development patterns where the car became king and we started just prioritizing the vehicle, and our home styles prioritize vehicles as well. And that's where we see a lot of garage doors. And these homes, for example, on the right is probably the most egregious, where the front door is actually on the side, and kind of see that there. And some others, for example, this is a fairly traditional single family detached type of a neighborhood, but all you see down the road is garage doors because the living space has taken secondary priority in the architectural design. So it's towards the rear of the lot. So one of the things I was a bit concerned about if we were to, make any changes was, are we going to end up with snout houses? Yes or no? And I think that the biggest thing that would force a snout house type of a design is a less wide lot, a more narrow lot is where you start to see more of that. But keeping that 80-foot frontage, reducing the side yard setbacks can allow for some more architectural variation It doesn't mean that it will come to fruition. Ultimately, that's up to the designer and the architecture. They could still design a very auto-centric floor plan on an 80-foot wide lot. But that was something I wanted to look into, just trying to scratch my head to see if that was something that would be problematic. I don't think necessarily that this particular amendment is going to force snout houses. If anything, I think it does open up the lot a little bit more to where we can get some more architecture to front the road other than garage doors, especially if we have side load garages, which need, pretty good turning radius to get into that side garage door. So,
And on that note, the 12-foot actually helps with that because that gives you more room to come in
On the
on the
radius.
side
yeah.
and turn. But one more thing about the side yard, you think about of your whole lot, if you live on a single family home lot, or of course, know lots of them, which you do. The side yard is the most wasted space. Front yard is for looks, backyard is, barbecue, playing, enjoying. That's your outdoor space, but the side yard is just too limited. And so that's why narrowing that up a little bit is a much lesser impact. And this example, this is these are much more narrow. So we're not proposing this, but I think Scott just wanted to show that it could work. You got 5 and you got 7.
Yeah, this is
Or
a
5 and 12.
subdivision. Yeah.
5 and 7, 5 and 12.
So in Harriman, they have, this is quarter acre zoning. These are third acre lots, but they have, quarter acre zoning where their side yard setbacks are 5 feet. And what they've done is they've traded off their elbow space for their front and rear yard space. And that's a priority. That's kind of just a fit and a feel. It's up to your discretion. Really, it doesn't really have implications beyond just what do you prioritize in a neighborhood. Do you want it to feel more separated and spread out? Or do you want to prioritize, more living space? Primarily what this exhibit is trying to show you is you need to have, at least 12 feet of a side yard to get side yard storage to really work and function. Trying to back this trailer, you can already see they have the pop outs on this one right here, but even with the pop outs in, trying to back this trailer up here is probably not the easiest task. Anything less than that, I think you're kind of asking for trouble, where we just get the storage in the front yard, in the front driveway. That's where we kind of talked about, hey, maybe consider not just a 10 and a 10 in this request, maybe consider doing, a ratio where one side is shorter than the other, so you can have that opportunity for side yard. When you get into a single family neighborhood, most folks in that stage of life, they're going to grow into a place where maybe they want to have something, a trailer or, toys of some sort. I think a 10 and a 10, while it does kind of create that uniform separation, you lose that opportunity for side yard storage, and then you end up with some of that clutter in the front yard, on the front driveway, or parked on the street. So that was kind of the intent behind this exhibit, is just showing, what does that look like? And this is kind of the aerial, but this is kind of the street view. Here's your third car garage. You still have plenty of room on the side. It doesn't feel claustrophobic, but it's not as wide as the existing zoning standards that we have in our city would allow for.
And the example on the far left, that's a side loaded.
That 17 footer.
Yeah.
I will say, I do think that is one value of the side yard, is just, I don't appreciate the aesthetic of the houses just being crammed in, where as Nan mentioned, you can literally touch from one house to the other. I thought that was one of the reasons we had those setbacks in the first place.
Yeah. That is true. It all comes down to the character that, the zoning is trying to get to. R112, it has the 10 and the 15. There are zoning classifications throughout the state of Utah that have less, but it changes that look and feel. So the question is in this request, is that something that we're okay with? What's unique here with the development agreement approach versus the zoning text amendment approach is, if we were to approve this on a zoning text amendment, it would apply broadly to the entire community. Whereas this is kind of a self-limitation that they are requesting for their specific neighborhood. So you kind of buy into it, knowing that that's what it's going to look and feel like, and everybody in the neighborhood kind of is playing by those same rules. Yeah, it does change the character, with reduced side yard setbacks.
And I mean, I think you have to consider that the development, the people behind it, they're obviously putting millions of dollars into this. they feel like that it's something that would really help them. So there is that private property value, giving them a little bit of flexibility, what they want to do with their own land. And then also all the homes here will be not custom from scratch, but the floor plans will all be exactly what the homeowner wants when they build it. You'll see it on their website. If you take a look at it, you can pick any of those plans along with 20 more. You can pick, you want a 2-car, a 3-car, a side loaded, do you want the ADU? What do you want on the front, the facade, all of that. It's a very custom designed feel in terms of a package. It's kind of like a car, I guess you could say. If you ever looked at cars online, you pick, of course, the model, the motor you want, and then what package do you want? You want all the way up to leather seats and seat warmers, or do you just want the basics? That's still nice. So that's kind of what it does. So it does give that flexibility. And so if a person does want more elbow room, it's easy. They just go with a 2-car garage and they pick the lot that they want and they get it. If someone wants that 3-car and a side loaded, they can make it work.
One of the things along that same line, I mentioned this in the staff report, there is great variety potential. Folks based on this business model are able to go and pick whatever floor plan and, whatever packages, and it kind of changes the variety from one house to the next, but there's no guarantee that there's a good blend and variety, which is a key characteristic to a neighborhood that doesn't feel like a cookie cutter. There's a lot of variety, a lot of different materials and colors, not to extremes where you have fuchsia and all sorts of random color palette type stuff. But one thing in the staff report mentions, if you are comfortable doing this, a recommendation is that maybe we put some language into the red lines that would ensure a minimum amount of variety from one home to the next. For example, not having 5 or 6 3-car garages with all of those 3-car garage doors fronting on the road. Maybe have a few that mix it up and change things from one home to the next. Now, what's interesting here in a development agreement is because this is a legislative action, we are not obligated to grant them a side yard reduction. But if we feel like there are elements that need to be added into the development agreement to mitigate anticipated issues or character issues or things that we're not quite happy about, then you can do that and you can request that. The developer doesn't have to agree. They can say, we're not interested in that. So be it, you make your recommendation based on what the red lines ultimately say. We go to the city council and they would make a decision on that. But there is the element of, we can negotiate here and we can talk about, we perceive this potential impact. What do you think about putting some language into this agreement that might mitigate that impact? Depends on what you think is an impact. You might not view that there really much is an impact, but maybe you do. And maybe that's where, as a planning commission, you can say, how about we look at putting some language in here? As it sits today, if they were to just move forward, record the plat, then they would just be able to pull a building permit with a floor plan that fits within the setbacks. And so we wouldn't really get any opportunity to, look at the character from one home to the next. And that's one thing to maybe keep in the back of your mind. Where this is a legislative action, we can have a little bit of bargaining power and say, this is an anticipated issue. Let's see if we can address it. But if the plat were to just record and move forward, then we kind of lose that ability because it's just a development right. And the state does not allow for us to dictate what a single family home looks like or the architectural characters unless it's through a negotiated development agreement. If it's by right, then they have the choice to choose their floor plans and their aesthetics. Does that make sense?
Teresa?
It makes sense, but I guess my question is if owners get to pick their lot, pick their house, pick their, their plan. If you put in stipulations like only so many of, not too many in a row of the same and stuff, how do you pull that off with buyers? You just say, well, if you pick this lot, you get these choices on plans, or do you understand what I'm?
For the first 3 people already submitted,
Yeah,
3
first-
garages,
first
so you
round.
can't.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that
that's what I
takes away
just
their-
wonder. How does that work with a? Do you
It's a
understand my
limitation.
question?
I'm sure this is not something that a developer loves to hear as a recommended, potential regulation, because it does limit choice and
I
it
mean, it
does
makes
limit
sense.
value.
It makes sense that you don't have copycat too. I just wonder how that works with.
But go ahead, Gavin.
I said, the first home I bought it was, you had to basically be the lowest three numbers to get the 3 lots that were released that week. And hundreds of people show up, and if you don't show up, you don't get the lot. So our number came up and we said, we want this model, and they said, you can't because the neighbor has
Yeah.
already chosen that model, and that's how it was
Yeah.
where I was at,
Yeah.
so.
Well, our latest house, we had to pick the plan that would fit on that lot. So
Yeah.
I understand that. It just makes it.
But-
so-
But so I just wanna, so nothing in the language is indicating that. What you're saying is that could be
We could
something
add,
we would recommend.
And that's a recommendation from staff. When you look at some of the neighborhoods, in Utah and other communities outside of Utah that really have a lot of character and stand the test of time, are very eclectic neighborhoods where every home was a custom build. Every home was allowed to choose their architecture, their materials. And you think about, Sugar House, you think about the Avenues, you think about some of those older neighborhoods where the business model for development back in the day was not where you buy up a large tract of land, subdivide it, and then cookie cutter it. That's where you lose character. That's where you lose, variety, and you have this repetitive nature, which is cheaper. It's efficient. It allows for lower home prices. So there is some cost that obviously is all baked all into this. But this is where it's like, well, how much does the city regulate this? How much do we stay out of that business? How much is this a property right thing versus trying to improve the overall aesthetics of the community so that everybody's, values and everything stays, in check. That's where this balance is. And so in the staff report, what I'm trying to point out is here are some potential impacts and some potential areas where we might want to discuss, some alternatives and the first two things that came to my mind was, let's talk about side yard storage and let's talk about architectural variation. As the red lines are currently drafted, there's not a requirement for forced variation. It's kind of up to the draw. You might have 3 or 4 homeowners that pick the exact same floor plan, exact same colors, and off you go. And that's where you get the cookie cutter unintentionally, but that's what would come to fruition versus forcing a little bit of some variation between one lot and the next, say maybe no more than 2 3-car garages side by side, or if it is side by side, you've got to go from a front load to a side load or something to where we mix it up a bit. But that's if we perceive that to be an issue and if we want to ensure that we get a guaranteed outcome.
So if we want to make those suggestions to the city council and they pass that, then the developer is required to do that.
Not
Correct.
necessarily. So you guys can make a recommendation. The developer does not have to agree with your recommendation. They may be obliged, say, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll come up with some language. We'll put it in the agreement. Let's come to an understanding of what we both think is reasonable and, mitigates the issue. Or they may just say, hey, it just doesn't fit in our business model. We just can't make that work. And then you say, okay, we'll take that into consideration. You make your recommendation based on the red lines that you see before you. Take it to the city council. Council may go ahead and approve it. They may not. But as part of your recommendation, you can say, we don't provide a positive recommendation because we wish that there was an element that forced some variation. And that would give the city council some pause to think about, well, is this that big of a deal? Do we want to require that or not? And council would then be able to make that decision or request to say, hey, we're also inclined to ask for such a thing. Would you be willing to put that in? Developer could say yes or no. And based on that final approach is what the decision makers would vote on. So this is a developer-led application. It's not city-led. It's the applicant coming to us saying, we have an idea, would allow for some variation, would allow for this idea of ADU facilitation. And that's where we as a community can say, okay, this is not a by right decision. Our current setbacks would not allow this. And if we are going to entertain this, it's legislative. We have some discretion. We can perceive those impacts and maybe find a way to mitigate them if we even think that it's an impact in the first place. So that's up to the discretion of the planning commission and their recommendation. It's up to the legislative authority that would approve or disapprove of what is being requested. Okay.
Kevin?
Yeah, I've got two items. So do we have any other zoning that is a minimum 8 foot per side?
In the city center, there are some smaller classifications that do allow for a slightly reduced setback, I believe. Let me pull it up.
Or I guess I'll extend this to to the landowner, do you have any other model homes or developments where you have setbacks at 8 feet per side or less?
In Utah, there's a lot of them. I could show you a lot of examples. I don't know all the numbers off the top
Yeah.
of my head, but yes, there are reduced ones. It's pretty common that the 24 is on the wide end of side yard setbacks.
Yeah, I'm used to, I have lived in places where it's been very narrow on the side. You can barely get a lawnmower from the front to the backyard, and
It's a wide lawnmower. Or
well, when you have window wells on the side,
yeah,
it can be difficult. You don't always have walking space to do that. So my concern is, do buyers who are coming and they see the model, do they have a chance to see what that looks like so they can make a decision? You're building, I assume, 1, maybe 2 model homes that'll start, and you'll use it as a sales center, I assume. I don't know
correct.
what the plan is, but that seems pretty common. So when most of the buyers will be coming through and you're selling, you're gonna have 1 model or 2 models, and how close do you plan to put those ones? Do you know?
Well, the model home will be that side yard one, and I don't know how it is on the floor plan, but it'll probably be pretty close to the 12 and 8 is what it will be.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the building designs is that it's all 3D, so people can see all that. And then with just a little bit of extra work, they can even see it on the lot. So they'll get to see what they have. And if their neighbors built first, it's really easy to look and see, okay,
Yeah.
You're 20 feet from this neighbor and you're 16 from that neighbor, because that's the closest you could be with these setbacks. Really easy to visualize that 3D. All of the design is called BIM. And so that's the architecture style. It's how bigger, more expensive commercial buildings are built, and everything is in that design. And so they can pick all the configuration that they want and then just press a button and it spits it out to building construction plans that are ready to go to the city for permitting. And this process, it's not custom from an architect starting ground zero, but it's way more advanced than cookie cutter,
Yeah.
roll them out kind of things. I'm not going to throw out any names, but some of those builders around. And so the intent with this neighborhood being so close to City Hall, the future police station, close to the downtown, future downtown, it's growing. Let's give it a really nice neighborhood. And that's where this middle end comes in.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that buyers have an understanding of what 16 feet between 2 homes looks like.
Yeah. I'm with that side load on the model home. I'm pretty sure that's where it would be, because you're going to need that 12 or 15 on the one to get those nice turn radius to pull a car in.
And then my last question for right now is fire code. The staff report covers a lot of things, but I didn't see an assessment by the fire code. What can you?
So my understanding of fire code is 10 feet. So you would have at least a 10-foot separation between structures, unless there's a fire rated wall that would allow for more burn time if a fire were to start in a structure adjacent. So that we could have a fire response and potentially put out the fire without it spreading to an adjacent building. So that's why you see a lot of these side yard setbacks in other communities in Utah. 5 is actually the minimum, unless it's an attached product where you have townhomes that are attached. Is it 6? Interesting.
Okay, so foundation to foundation is 12 essentially, with eaves being typical eaves. Yeah, and so one of the so when I was reading this earlier, my first thought went to where I had come from in Colorado, and in the about 2 years ago there was a massive fire driven by wind, and in the Superior and Louisville, Colorado areas, and 300 to 400 homes went up in neighborhoods. Whole neighborhoods were gone. And one of the contributing factors was they're built very tight together, as is common in that area. So, but this meets fire code.
It would, yeah, as proposed, you would have a minimum of 8.
And I don't know that that was an extreme example. I don't even know it at a 30-foot separation, because those winds were extremely high, very, our homes are built out of wood. It's what we do in
Yep.
Utah. And so very flammable. And it just, I was tracking that fire. It's like,
Yeah.
One of the things in the staff report talks about if we want to have a disproportionate ratio, so instead of a 10 and a 10, go down to an 8 and a 12 to allow for that side yard storage. That was kind of an idea, 8 and 12. And when you look at this particular example here, I think 12 is the minimum you'd want to have for reasonable side yard storage. I think if you were to go to like a 13 and a 7, it would even, better facilitate that. But then you'd be at, a potential separation of 2 homes side by side of 14 instead of 16. So it's just one of those trade-offs. It's like, where's the sweet spot here for the ability of a side yard storage possibility? When you get down to 10, that's when you start to lose that ability to store anything on the side, especially if you have like a camper, you're worried about clipping the eave when you're trying to back it into that side yard. It becomes very challenging. So anyways, that's a point of consideration.
you want to open the public hearing?
Yeah, we do need to do that at some point.
Any other questions?
Well, I'll just
I can
throw it-
come back up after you have the public hearing and get into deliberation.
While you're up, I'll
Yeah.
just ask for clarification on one thing you said. You mentioned that the landowner has invested millions of dollars and they have their property rights. To me, that sounded like you were implying that if we don't grant this exception, we're somehow violating the property rights of the landowner.
No, it's just that they have a very vested interest in this. And
Right,
and I bring that up. I think it's something we have to think about.
But
Is
they invested that money knowing that the code is what it is.
right.
So
So-
that's the only question I have. Well, not the only question. When this happened, they knew the code. So now why do they want to change it? Why didn't they have this?
What they're hearing from the market, they're hearing talk about ADUs, they're hearing talk about third car garages, a little bit more design, and I talked about and development is a process. You never know all of it from the beginning, and that's a process. And in the beginning, it was of course platting, design, layout, all that infrastructure, and now that ground has broken, that they're building infrastructure, talking with customers. No homes have been sold yet. And the nice thing is that this development agreement is with a single landowner. And so that doesn't complicate it in any way. But now they're talking with customers, saying that it's like this, they're really listening to what people in the market are wanting.
But have those voices in the market changed in the last couple of years? Like third car garages aren't a novelty.
No, they're not. Just a little bit more demand. I think people wanting that for their toys or that third car, and also the ADU, and the ADU has changed. I mean, 5 years ago, nobody knew what an ADU was, and now, of course, it's required by state law that every city allow them, and so there's just been a lot of discussion. Almost all of the home builders in Utah of certain scale and size are adding ADUs as optional, whether it's in the basement or on the side or all kinds of, it's built in there. So when someone comes in, says, I want a floor plan, it's there. And that's just part of the market. And this solution, it checks a couple boxes that the basement one doesn't, because it gives that physical separation, the sound, a little bit more privacy than the other one. And so I think a lot of thought went into that. And of course you could still do a basement ADU.
Well, one of the plans is
There-
that. One of the plans has a basement ADU.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think thinking along that same thing, I mean, it just seems like when you just look at it, because it's pretty square, just taking out a lot on each row would, you know what I'm saying? Just
Well, that-
taking out a few lots, then you can make those, all of them wider.
I
That-
think that sounds easier than probably is said and done if they've already.
What do you
That
think?
was why I was saying at the time of plat development was really when these considerations should have been accounted for, not as an exception at this point in the development. That was why I asked the initial question about you could achieve the same result with slightly larger lot sizes. And I know the plat is what it is, it sounds like right now, and that would be too much expense to change.
Yeah, I mean,
But
yes.
But again, the voices that you're talking about in the market were very clear at the time of the plat development too, I would imagine.
Well, and also zoning is constantly changing in all cities, including setbacks and all of that. I mean, like I said, Weber County just dropped from a 25 or 30 side yard setback. Scott probably knows what it was before, down to 15. It's more narrow like this. I mean, that's the direction we're moving as Utahns have babies and we grow and we have jobs, as we urbanize and start to get a little bit more compact. Neighborhoods get a little bit more compact, and then also downtowns do. And it's just kind of an evolution and discussion.
Well, maybe. I think people will always be happy to have a little more space too.
And they
Yeah.
can, and they could buy a larger lot. They could do a 2-car. They could not choose this development. They can go to Lewiston or Cornish or Clarkston. I mean, there's all kind of, they can go up on the hill. They can buy a 1/2 acre. I mean, that's where freedom comes in. That's what's so great about this.
But again, they live in North Logan, or they want to live in North Logan, and they know that the code is what it is. So they have certain expectations when they look to buy a house in North Logan, based on how the code has existed.
Okay,
So it's-
let's open up our public hearing. All right. These are the instructions. Before you begin, please state your name for the record. Please speak into the microphone so that your comments can be recorded. Please limit your statements to 2 minutes. Do you have a phone? Do you
I
have
do,
time?
yep.
If you're also speaking on behalf of others, you may ask the chairman for more time. Please phrase your opinions in the form of statements, not questions. A public hearing is your opportunity to express your opinions to the planning commission. It is not time to ask questions and expect dialogue between yourself and the commission or city staff. Please address your comments to the commission, not to the public. The commission might ask questions about your comments in order for them to better understand you. If you have questions or need to discuss an issue, please meet with the planning commission members or the appropriate city staff member before the public hearing where dialogue can take place. You may provide a written statement as your input for a hearing. You may read your entire statement or summarize it. The 2-minute limit applies. You may provide a copy of a written statement to the city recorder. He will make copies for the commission. Written comments, if a copy is provided, become a part of the public record, but are not included in the minutes of the meeting. All right, so we will open up our public hearing on this development on this possible recommendation regarding a proposed amendment to the Smiling H subdivision development agreement to allow slightly reduced side yard setbacks. Any comments?
Yeah, there's at least one. My name's Russell Goodwin. And I think the state now mandates ADUs, if I'm not mistaken, but I had the honor and privilege, like you, of serving on a previous planning commission. And we, like I see on your agenda, you'll be talking about the Utah League. We learned a lot. We brought in the Envision Utah and did a visioning process for North Logan City. And one thing we learned, to make great neighborhoods, the best thing is connectivity, having multiple means of egress and ingress. And I'm just happy to see that one of the access points here to this phase 1 of the Smiling H on 8 is through Gene Rasmussen's property. We were able to, with that planning commission that I was part of, was able to secure a right of way through Gene's property, anticipating this development at some future time. I think it's making it a better development. If you go a bit south on 8th, now there are multiple flag lots there, and there's no interconnectivity It's drive in, drive out. We tried to get back rear access maintained. We couldn't do that. We found a historical right of way on what is approximately 700 east onto 22nd north. That would have been between the Israelsons and the Bills home, but they both fought us very strongly, and we couldn't preserve that access point there. But I just wanted to point out some work of your predecessors here, I think, has lent itself to a better development. I'm happy to see that that access point has been preserved.
Thank you.
We designated a few others around the city that have been lost. There's still a few that I'm hoping might come through, but I wanted to point
Thank you.
that out. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Brent Lawyer. I'm a resident of North Logan. I'm speaking as a resident, although previously you've seen me here before you speaking on behalf of Smiling Age. So just reminding you that I have been involved in that previously as full disclosure. As far as the issues that have been discussed tonight, there's been a couple that have been brought up that I'd like to address. One of them is the possibility of going back and amending the plat. Given the amount of infrastructure that's already been installed, ripping any of that out and redoing it to allow for wider lots is not feasible. It's just not, there's no way to do that. So I just wanted to note that. When it comes to amending the side yard to allow for different plan sets, I think we've all seen, I mean, we can go down to the west side. There's plenty of examples of just cookie cutter, you know, hey, welcome to my garage, right? Come on in. And giving the developer an opportunity to basically create a more, I'd say, walkable community where you're walking down and you're saying, I'm walking by so-and-so's house. I'm not walking by their garage. It does give it a different feel that makes it significantly more enjoyable as both a resident of the neighborhood as well as somebody that's going through. Thirdly, it is true that as a developer, they're aware of the side setbacks when they went in, and certainly they could go with them as they are. I do feel that with the changes in the proposed elevations, particularly on the frontage, that a reduced setback would allow, would create a better looking community, not just garages one after the other. It was bad enough when it was all 2-car garages. Now 3-car garage is the minimum. Maybe we should just build garages and not build houses. But be that as it may, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and that anyway, it slips my mind, and I apologize.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawyer. Anyone else? All right, we will close the public hearing and commission. Let's talk about what we want to propose.
Well, I just kind of let you know where I'm at on this. So, you know, I've lived in a subdivision where the setbacks were minimal and slightly smaller than this as well. And you know, there's issues with getting material back and landscaping and there's a lot of things that make it not so fun, but at the same time, you know, many people live like with homes like that, and they're good homes, and you get a little more room in the home, you get more options in the home. And once the landscaping's in, hopefully you aren't trying to haul dirt and everything back there through a small space, avoiding you know, window wells and so forth. So that's just my personal experience with that. But I think it's also very valid to have different types of homes and setbacks and sizes and choices. And so I don't have any inherent worry about these particular setbacks or homes, having lived in one there. I would hope that those who are looking to buy there would have ways to see models of it and just get a feel for it so they can be informed. So I don't know how, I don't want to force anything where they have to put in their contracts, notice this is, doesn't meet common standard. I don't want to do that, but overall, I don't have an issue with it. The fire code, I'm glad it meets fire code. And that's really it. I'm okay with it. There are setbacks as an owner, but hopefully they can be informed buyers.
Thank you, Gavin. Anybody else? Heather?
While I do hear that people would have preferred, to see this vision earlier and maybe take a couple lots off, I am trying to think of myself as a citizen or a community member wanting to buy, and I can see both ways, like, oh, my space feels squishier, but I personally like looking at this. I would prefer a third car garage if I'm a buyer. I wish I personally had a third car garage, but I don't have the space. And I do think the ADU provides something to our community that is welcome. I would love to build an ADU in my own backyard one day. I wish for these things. And so I do think that the current plan is very aesthetically appealing. I think I would hope that the owners of this land, and as you're talking to people and buyers, that you would say, hey, these 3 people already have this sort of land, you don't want the gray house. They already picked that out. I would hope that would be, so you don't have the same house. Maybe it is the same house, but different colors. That still looks different. I would just hope that you would tell them, the buyers, just because if I was buying and I just built the exact same color, I think it'd feel weird. That's not that important for our decision. But if we're talking about aesthetically appealing neighborhoods and welcoming, I personally am not opposed to this change. But I do hear the concerns of others, and I sense that is important, but I'm thinking as a buyer, this is more appealing to me. And I think it's fine for that's where I stand.
Jenny? Teresa?
I think a lot like Heather. I think by allowing it, it's going to be a better subdivision. I just think it is, because the houses will be, anyway, I think it is. I do struggle with, this is what was approved and this change. I do struggle with that, but if we have a choice of leaving it how it is and the houses that could be built there, or making this change and the houses could be built there, I would go with the different options for the houses. So I would vote in favor of it.
Okay. Jenny?
So I guess I have a little bit of a different opinion. I understand that the plat is far enough along that it is what it is. I guess the point that I was trying to make was the market demands that you're talking about have existed for at least 4 years.
Mhm.
So the time to consider a third car garage or a side ADU was at the time of plat development. So it feels to me like this is, you develop the plat knowing that the setbacks are what they are. And it feels like it's a little bit of the big developer coming in and expecting the city to make an exception because you're the big developer coming in. And, the code exists for a reason. I do believe that there are exceptions and that there are times when an exception could be considered. I do think that's a pretty high bar, and I don't think this meets that bar, in my opinion. So I would be leaning towards right now, or recommending to the city council that we not grant this exception.
Okay. Explain to me one more time, Scott, and I can't find it in here, about if we send on a positive recommendation with stipulations, it doesn't really matter because the developer can do whatever he wants anyway.
No, they can,
No.
they have,
So explain that to me so I
Oh.
understand.
a developer can build within the rights that exist in the code today. So let's just pretend that this plat moves forward, records, they have 80-foot wide lots, they have 24-foot side yard setbacks, the combined sum between the two. The closest they can get to the side property line is 10 and 14. They would just have to find floor plans that fit that building envelope. And that's by right what they'd be allowed to do. They could submit a building permit as soon as all the subdivision improvements are installed and they get to that point where the infrastructure is present. And that's what they're by right allowed to do today. What they're asking for is for a reduced side yard setback, which would give them that variety or that the ability to use some different floor plans and configurations. And that's what the request is. And we're not bound to grant that to them. It doesn't set a precedent, but what it does do is it allows for the standard to be enjoyed by just the properties in that subdivision. It doesn't apply to the rest of our zone, R112 zone, our parcels. Okay.
But doesn't that feel a little bit like we're making an exception for one and not the others? And why, if
Potentially.
that is the case, why are we?
We could, I mean, so here's the deal, like they're asking for this and they're just saying we would just like to apply it to our subdivision. Maybe we like it as a city and we could then make the decision to apply it to the rest of our zoning classifications. We're not obligated to do it. But it might be a good idea, it might not, we might like it, we might not like it. But that's up to our discretion. That's a legislative change where we could change it going forward.
I guess the point, like, if I were just a single family trying to build a home on an R112 lot, and I really wanted to put in a 3-car garage, but I was not able to because of these setbacks, I would be pretty mad knowing that the city makes exceptions for the big developer, but not for me
In an existing subdivision,
on my own
Where-
R112 lot.
you yourself could come in and request a change to the zoning classification to allow that. So you have by right, you could submit a text amendment request and say, hey, I'd like to change the setbacks because I'd like to do this. And that's where we'd have the discretion to say, is this a good idea? It's an established neighborhood. This neighborhood is not yet established. But in an established neighborhood, I think you're right in the sense of the neighbors around you have the expectations. They bought into that neighborhood with that regulatory environment. And so if one neighbor changes it, maybe I would feel a little bit frustrated because now the character of that neighborhood as it has already been established is changing. This situation is a little bit different where the neighborhood is new. The entire neighborhood is being developed and you're buying into it. Like they'd mentioned, nothing's been sold yet. And so you would go into this understanding all of your neighbors in this neighborhood have that allowance. But in an existing neighborhood, that's a totally different topic of concern for sure, because it's an established character. And right here, we're talking about the character of a new neighborhood. That's where we say, do we like this? Everyone's buying into it from the onset. But maybe we like it citywide, and that's where when this first came in, it's like, I don't think we would ever consider this as a text amendment because it applies way too broadly, changes the character of existing neighborhoods in our community. And I don't know that we necessarily want to go down that road. It's a very large consideration at that point. So that's why we're here with an amendment to the development agreement that applies a little bit more acutely to this neighborhood.
Okay, thanks. I've struggled with this one since I've read it, because
Yeah.
I feel a lot like Kenny feels. I think, because we've had other situations where a developer has come in and wanted us to change, knowing full well, that's what they bought, that's how it was zoned, whatever. And so I struggle with this one. I want it to look nice. I want people to have an option to have it less aesthetically nice, but I also want a developer to come in and say, this is what we've got to work with. And if they don't like it before they get their little infrastructure and whatever, talk about it then. And so I have a hard time with this one, you guys, because I want it to look nice. I don't want to look like cookie cutters, but I also want it to say, I want the developer to know this is what the regulations are. This is what we have to work with when we bought it. This is what we have. So I'm stuck on this one.
But I think that's good feedback for the developer. I think you should hear that and take that back because it is
Well, they've
hard,
already done it.
right? Yeah, it's hard, like it's,
So
you know, I understand, I can see that.
I think you have a great point.
But
I
then I
mean,
look at the buyer.
if I could pull out my time machine and we could roll back a few years, this would probably be in the development agreement. It'd be something we'd be talking about, being like, okay, this is what we want to do. And building neighborhoods is a partnership between cities and developers. I mean, almost all of us live in a neighborhood, built by developers and builders and craftsmen and all of that. And it's a process and it's constantly evolving. And that's where that dialogue you're talking about needs to happen. And it's a constant dialogue of what does the market need, what's happening with our growth and our resources, and where are we going. And planning is a constant thing. It's not like here's the solid plan set in stone, no more. It is constantly changing. As Scott knows, that zoning is constantly being discussed, and cities are constantly planning.
We know
And that's how we take care of the future, is by constantly doing it rather than just plan it once and set it in stone. So I
And
appreciate you
I
listening
appreciate
today.
your thoughts on that. I really do, but I still have a hard time with this one because
So I appreciate this conversation. It's good. So again, we don't have to do this. We don't have to offer this as a city. Are there any other stipulations or requirements that you'd like to say? So knowing that this doesn't make you happy, is there anything that we could say, well, let's do this, this, and this to mitigate maybe some of that unhappiness and to get things that would benefit the city, future residents, nearby residents? I mean, we've talked about like required, differences, and you can't put the same home next door, whatever. Are there things that we would want to recommend to the city council to consider that would mitigate your concern, I guess?
if we recommend to change you're asking if we recommend to change the
Yes, I mean, so,
Size.
yes, we have, there's the red, right? The red text, this is what the anticipated changes. We can recommend adding something to this that may not be, the developers, they may not choose that, but it's something that we think may be good to meet a need of the city or future residents.
Well, that's what I've said, but right now it doesn't matter. I mean, future residents, yes, for some other developer, but right now it doesn't matter what we say. Teresa?
Well, I mean, like in that development.
In the development agreement.
Well, so
What text?
there's gonna be, I don't know how many homes, 100 homes, I don't know how many are total on both days.
There's 50, it must be 49,
Yeah.
51 minus 110, 51 minus 110, so 59
So,
and
some
and
number-
51 and 59.
So there's, 300 to 400 to 500 people who are gonna be living here. Are there some things that we can require of the developer if they want these changes, that they'll do these things that'll help make life there and in the neighborhood better? Here's our opportunity, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so phase 1 is the one that's the site prep and utilities are currently being installed in phase 1. Phase 2, it's not. Can the developer decide on phase 2 to make less lots and be able to offer these floor plans in phase 2?
Can you make the exception to only phase one?
They would have to agree to a development agreement splitting between the two developments. Right now, the development agreement covers both phases. So we'd have to go into that aspect and split it into two development agreements between a first phase and a second phase. And they would also have to amend the preliminary plat because that was what was approved in the configuration that is moving forward. Now they're just on the final platting of that first phase, then they would move on to the final platting of the second phase. Nothing is set in stone until it records. So yes, there could be some availability to move stuff around, but that it's up to the developer if that's something they're amenable to. And you could request it, you could talk about it, say, hey, what do you think about this? If you think that's a reasonable request to mitigate a perceived concern, that's up to, discussing, and I don't know where everyone would feel with that.
Can I answer that? I think it's totally unreasonable. It's gone through this whole process of design, planning, a lot of engineering, planning, all of the city's times, the city's resources. We did come for a simple request on the side yard setbacks, not to redesign the whole project. Now, I have had, Scott and I have had a lot of discussion over this over the last couple of months. And of course, there's the concern about the garages and some of the aesthetics. And we have put some time, we even have a little bit of dialogue. And so I do have some thoughts on that. Clearly, that's a concern with the planning commission. And so we do have mitigate that we've been talking about. Okay, I got one more for you.
Thanks.
Here. If the concern is walking on the side yards, 8 foot minimum, 3 foot window well, 5 feet, which is standard sidewalk. So there is that distance. I don't know all the riding lawnmower dimensions, but I think plenty would fit, and certainly a walking behind. Also adding, safeguarding against cookie cutterness, since that's the term of the evening, and just standard. Here's some ideas and language that I developed that the developer would be okay with, to prevent that. This would go in the development agreement, and I'll just read it. For the purpose of the development agreement, a conventional 3-car garage has 3-car doors, white, and a third car, and the third car garage is set back 2 feet. The developer agrees to not build more than 3 homes in a row with conventional 3-car garage without doing a garage treatment. And obviously that's a made up term. Options are listed below. And so we're saying you could do 3 homes and then you got to do something different. And of course, this is the maximum. The real goal is that the whole neighborhood is just rich with variety, all these different homes. This process allows people to choose their plan, choose their material, choose their windows, choose their setbacks. I mean, the configuration is just there. And I think, and just like you ask, when you're building, you do want to do different things. But again, getting back to the development agreement. So before somebody could do that 5th home or do something different, then you got to mix it up. And the options include a side loaded garage, wood looking garage material. Obviously people aren't building garage doors out of wood like my parents did. Accessory dwelling unit, side loaded, place with a 3rd-car garage. 3rd-car garage is set back 5 or more feet than the other garages. 2-car or single-car garage. Probably won't be a single, but of course that would be an option. Garage doors with windows, including full glass frosted. I don't know if you've seen those, kind of that architecture garage door. They're really pretty cool. Dark color garage doors, and then architectural garage, which could include styles matching the home, such as darker materials, glass, handles, trim, that kind of thing. And you've seen, there are some examples we've shown where it has that wood treatment. And so you're taking what is normally the plain Jane part of it and tying it into the architecture. And so this option, and this was just even the last few days for the staff report, went in thinking about ways to mitigate, all garages. And it's not going to be all 3rd-car garages, but some may want that. So this was something that I've kind of been working on.
So I was gonna, I guess my answer to your question, Gavin, is that's hard for me. Like I think this would help with at least the appearance of the garage cookie cutterness, but to me, the greater problem with the aesthetic is just the look of the houses being crammed in so closely together. So whether you can vary the variety of the garage look and feel, they're still going to look like they're crammed in there. So I agree with you. I'm not barbecuing in my side yard, but I find value in the side yard because it provides that separation from my neighbors. And
are you okay with other people choosing to buy their own home to have a lesser side yard, and someone that wants a wider side yard goes to a different development?
I'm okay with the code as it exists today. That's what I'm okay with.
So I guess we're at a point where we can either send a positive recommendation to the city council or a vote of 3, 4, and 2 against, or not do anything. What are our choices, Scott?
All of the above. You could do a positive recommendation as it's drafted, a negative recommendation as it's drafted. You could do conditions of a positive approval. You could do a negative recommendation because of certain aspects, so the city council can understand why the recommendation was negative, as it might help them in their deliberation on their end. But yeah, you have the discretion anywhere in between those options.
Okay. So this is interesting. I kind of, I mean, I like all your ideas. I think whatever you build are going to be wonderful. I think if you still, if we didn't change your side yards, I mean, what are your houses going to look like that they get to choose from?
I think it's about 40% of them would have to be a 2-car. So that option is removed from,
But not all of them. But not all of them.
But not all. of them.
but not all of them. And so this gives a lot, we may not even get all of them still as is, but this gives a lot more people that freedom and opportunity to have a little bit of flexibility with the building plans that they want to choose.
I think also like the buyer, this is just my thought, that they're choosing to invest more money and pay for a 3rd-car garage, then they would choose that versus maybe wanting a 2-car, that we can't ensure that every person who's buying this land is gonna, or their land is going to build a 3-car garage or do an ADU. So it could be 2-car and they could have the 24-foot setback anyway. Just based on everyone has different incomes. And so I'm not envisioning every single person's gonna have a 3-car garage and an ADU or whatever. I just think I'm just thinking it provides flexibility for a buyer. Maybe it's your kid, maybe it's a friend who needs the home. I don't know. I just
But-
think it's flexibility. And
and I
I
think-
get the code and I
I
see
think what
that. I just-
Kenny and I are thinking is, and I get that. But if I buy this, I don't want my neighbor to be 5 feet away from me. If I
think-
buy my plot and it's changed, see, that's what I just
Mm-hmm.
don't understand.
I think we have to remember that the buyer's understanding this. Like if you're buying it, you're not buying it because you don't want that. But the person coming in may want that. They may say, I don't care that I'm 60.
But if we change this, everybody gets that.
Well, I think that, have you sold lots?
No lots of,
So
Yeah,
everyone
no-
coming in would know.
not a single lot has been sold.
So it's gonna be transparent.
So everybody will know what they're getting from the start.
No,
Right,
I-
but
I don't think they will. Because if I build my house and I want that big setback, I'm not guaranteed that my neighbor is gonna have that same setback.
that's what I'm
That's,
saying.
that's a problem, because you're not guaranteed that. If you buy saying, I'm expecting this setback, and then the person who buys the lot next to you,
I think
does
they
the
would have to
narrow.
know
I
they
need
get
to
at
look
least
at the
8
code.
feet on one side and they could have their 12, you would know that, you would know it could be 8 feet.
that's
So-
what I'm saying. though.
So, I mean,
So I think that is clear.
It's a reduction of 2 feet at the most on a single side.
But how would your buyers know that? Because if I were buying, I would go look at the code. But this would be an exception to the
So,
code.
so
How would they know?
one thing
Do
you could
we
do,
say the
one thing you could do with that is every buyer is gonna have a contract. And in the contract's gonna have certain disclosures about the
Yeah.
lots, platting, setbacks, easements, on and on and on and on and on. And so we could suggest to the city council that all contracts in these lots have to indicate that these lots
Yeah.
are subject to a deviation from the standard setbacks that are less than. And you could even include some of the measurements in that disclosure. So that's a way that could happen.
It would also be on the
Which I think is
plat,
correct.
so those who are
Do
doing
we have
due
a plat
diligence,
too?
we would make sure, because every plat that we record has an exhibit that shows what are the setbacks for this particular subdivision. Some developers want to have a particular aesthetic, and they actually self-impose more restrictive setbacks than the underlying zoning. And we're okay with that because it's more restrictive than the code. So they're well within the underlying code requirements. It's a self-required setback. In this instance, it's less than code, and that's why the development agreement is required to go through this legislative process for the city to do this checks and balance discussion. Is this a good idea? Do we like the aesthetics? Is this something we could get on board with, yes or no? If it is approved, if, for example, you guys were to move forward, city council approves it, it would be on the plat as the setbacks would be communicated to all of those potential buyers from the onset.
And I think it would be in the seller's best interest to have that in the contract, because you're gonna have less ticked off people if you would disclose that up front anyways, instead of a blind, like, why is my neighbor 8 feet from me? I think that should be a requirement.
It'll be part of the design process too, because
Yeah.
when you go in and you sit down and you design your own home, you're putting it on the law, and that's where that discussion happens with the home designer. Hey, you got 8 feet on one side, you got 12 on the other. We can move it this way, and so they're going to have that experience. You buy a second generation home; it's already built. You see what you get, and you know what you get. You're the home buyer of the first home. You go through that process with the designer, and you'll see that on your own home, and hopefully you're paying attention to your own home, so you know that your neighbors can also be 8 or 12 or whatever. So I think there's multiple opportunities here. Yes, people aren't going to read the development agreement. None of my neighbors know anything about our zoning other than it's single family. But they're certainly probably not going to read the development agreement, but they should look at the plat, because that's pretty common to do when you're picking out a lot, and they will go through the building design.
I just, Scott, you made a comment earlier that stuck out to me. We're like, look at the neighborhoods that stand the test of time. I mean, we're talking about a neighborhood here that is in the heart of North Logan. We want it to stand the test of time. It's adjacent to our city offices. I don't think cramming houses in and the maximum density possible is a good look to stand the test of time. Like the code, that's why we have those setbacks in the code.
Yeah, and I can understand that concern. I think that there are neighborhoods that stand the test of time that come in all shapes and sizes. I think that there's a lot of variables that go into whether a neighborhood is successful or not. So I think that it's more of a, is there quality design? Are there quality materials? And does it feel human centric versus auto centric? The older neighborhoods are designed, let's just, for example, pre-World War II, maybe a household had one car, not two, and they're a lot closer together, right? And that's a lot smaller of a neighborhood in some of those pre-war expansionism neighborhoods that happened after the fact. That's where we get sprawl. That's where we get, large frontages, bigger lots, and that's just how the development pattern has occurred. As we have become more autocentric as a nation, and there are older cities, Boston and some of those pre-war developed cities that are a lot closer together, and they have great neighborhoods that have stood the test of time, but they have timeless materials. They have eclectic design. They don't have cookie cutter. There's more variables to it than that. There's socioeconomic, variables also that are mixed into that. There's all sorts of things. So it's really hard to put, a pin on what exactly creates a timeless neighborhood. There are some principles, variation in design. That's one of the things we've talked about, making it more human scale, human centric, where the architecture focuses on the human. But here, this is a point of consideration. This particular request does deviate from what our other R112 neighborhoods look like, but not necessarily all of our zones. We do have zones, particularly on the fringe of the city center, that do go down to smaller setbacks. Now, whether or not those neighborhoods stand the test of time is yet to be seen, right? But I think that it's a more complex topic of just your proximity to your neighbors. I think there's a lot more variables at play that create timelessness. It's a tough one for sure. We want every neighborhood to be timeless, but every community has neighborhoods that do well and that don't do well. You always have a portion of town that don't. And maybe that's just a socioeconomic factor that every community has to deal with. I don't know. It gets extremely complex at that point.
So, and I think, what's our guarantee if we change the setbacks? And yes, it gives us more option that we still don't end up with a, what is it, snout neighborhood?
The Snout House. I'm not
Snout
saying
house.
that every
We
single one
don't-
of these
so we
would
don't-
be,
We don't have a guarantee.
yeah.
There's not a guarantee, but I assume that the plans that they've shown us in this application are the ones that are gonna offer the buyers, but you could get halfway built and another developer comes in. I've seen that happen too, and they change, so. But, I mean, do you know, are there covenants and restrictions on these lots as far as minimum lot size and?
There are CCNRs, but it doesn't talk about zoning standards for lot width or setbacks. I don't know if it talks about architectural. I'm sure there's some architectural review component, but it would not dictate the types of things that we've been talking about tonight.
Well, I live in a neighborhood where the CNRs do cover setbacks,
Hmm.
so.
So the city setbacks are what would govern in that regard, unless the CCNRs are more restrictive than, and that's a that's a private covenant for that neighborhood to abide by.
So does this neighborhood have CCRs about related to setbacks or?
There is an HOA. I doubt it does. I don't know. I haven't read the CCNRs front to back, but I doubt it talks about setbacks.
There's, yeah. Brent, do you know? But I would doubt it. There's no reason to change the city setbacks.
If, for example, a building permit were to be requested and their CCNRs say that their setbacks are less than the cities, we would say no, we would not issue the building permit.
Right.
If their CCNRs are more restrictive than the cities, we don't care because we don't enforce private covenants. Their HOA board would, and presumably they would have approval through their HOA before they come to the city. But if it's more restrictive, that's on them. If it's less restrictive, ours still governs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but where I'm headed with that is that if we're worried about all the homes looking similar or snout houses, whatever the worry is there. From the homes that I've seen in in this application, those don't fit that definition to me. Right, as I look at the different options here, there's lots of different options and lots of different looks and feels and architectural designs. So I don't see that, but that doesn't mean that the market doesn't turn down like it did in 2009 and developers go out of business. And 3 years later, a new developer buys it and says, we're not selling those homes, we're selling different homes. And those different homes are gonna look like this. And so then that leads me to, if there are recorded CCNRs on the properties that requires setbacks, minimum lot sizes, things like that, that may mitigate some of that worry is where I'm headed with that.
Point of clarification, just so everybody understands, if, let's say these guys go belly up and they sell half the project to another developer, the development agreement would still govern that future developer's future continued development of whatever is left to build. Unless they come and ask for an amendment and they say, look, the way that the agreement was before in this current market does not pencil. We need to make a change. We'd go back through the same legislative change.
I agree, but there's nothing in the development agreement that says you can't build the exact same home.
Correct.
Line after line after line. I don't believe you're doing that, and that's not what you're offering
Sure.
to customers, and that's not what you're proposing.
I'm what I handed you, you can verbally add that to your motion and that could be part of it. If that's a big concern, is that you could add that to the motion. And so when the city council sees it, they would see the text that's already in, unless you change it in any way. And then also you could add this developer option as well.
Yeah.
And this is something we're willing to self-impose. And like Scott said, the development agreement runs with the land.
Yeah, I understand that. So I'm just trying to figure out what's the best thing we can do to give advice to the city council. That's kind of where I'm at right now, and we could say we're mixed. Here's the pros, here's the cons. Good luck. We could give a motion to approve or not. I may just throw one out and test one and see where it goes. But before I do that, Do we want to talk about like sending a mixed report? I don't know how we.
Can you send a mixed report?
Absolutely. You guys don't all have to agree, and I don't think that that's the intention of a multi-member commission. That's good to have varying opinions and not everybody should be on the same page. Otherwise, it's just a rubber stamp committee, right?
Right.
So if you guys have differing opinions, you could make a motion. Whoever's motion actually carries would be the formal recommendation. But what is communicated to the city council is it wasn't a slam dunk. It was a 3-2 motion. And here were some of the reasons why it wasn't. And you could put that in and you can communicate all those thoughts to the city council for their consideration.
So when you say whoever's motion carries, like if one of us makes a motion that only gets two ayes.
It would fail.
Then
and
you
then-
have to do
okay,
another.
yeah,
Right.
and then another motion is made. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, I was just, I still think I'm unswayed from being,
that's okay.
No, I guess my opinion is still to submit a recommendation that we would grant the sit-down. I just don't think it meets the bar.
So you're welcome to make that a formal.
Do you want to make, are you
No,
making a
I'm not
motion?
making a motion. I
Okay.
thought we were just still opening.
She just can't.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Maurice.
I was just expressing my opinion.
I,
That's all.
I kind of think we're at the point where we're mixed opinions here.
And yeah,
You want to say something, Gavin?
Well, I'm gonna make a motion that I think will hit as near down the middle as I can and we can chat about it.
Okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
I'm
So-
excited for this.
So I move that we provide a positive recommendation to the city council on the proposed amendment to the Smiling H subdivision development agreement to allow slightly reduced side yard setbacks with the following addendums. Per the staff recommendation in regarding architectural impacts that we take as example language that the city council could consider as what's been provided by the developer. We can include this in the record. And the second is that we recommend to the city council that the developer be asked to provide a positive declaration, what's the word I'm looking for here, but they have to positively communicate to their customers and contractor other ways.
Disclose.
Disclose that these setbacks do not meet the standard zoning setbacks. So that's the motion.
Okay, it has been moved. Do I have repeat? all?
Second.
So at this point, you
Uh,
can open it up for discussion.
need a
can-
second first.
Correct.
Yeah, so we have to,
To
I
see if-
second.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
it's been moved and seconded that this board sends a positive recommendation to the city council.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't
gotta
have to,
go
do I?
verbatim. No,
Okay,
it's in the record.
all in favor?
Can discuss.
Oh, do we want to discuss it
Because then you
more?
could add more things we learned or.
Do we have any more to discuss?
Might I make a comment?
Yes, make a
So,
comment,
Based on the
Scott.
motion, we would be adding a few of these mitigating elements that the developer has put forward, right? If we look at these, the concern that I have is
I wouldn't be in support.
we would maybe still have 3-car garages side by side with minor embellishments on those garage doors such as windows or handles. If I were to look at this, I think that we haven't quite mitigated entirely the intent.
Okay.
And perhaps we maybe take a few of these bullet points and look at them and maybe pull a few of those out. If that's the intent and the desire.
Well, and that's why I said as example language, the city council, I'll let the city
No,
council sort
We'd have
that
to
out.
have the
Okay.
link.
I think we need to put that language in.
Okay.
So Teresa?
I don't know if it matters, but at this point right now, I would vote against the motion. So if we want to keep discussing, we can, or we can.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'm right there with you, Teresa, but
Me too.
And what is your reason why? I understand
It's not a-
Kenny's.
Not a time for open motion.
All right. So it has been moved and seconded that we send this positive recommendation on to the city with certain stipulations. Is that good enough language? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, 2 in favor, Gavin and Heather. All opposed?
hey,
Me.
Nay, nay.
So Teresa, Kenny, Nan opposed.
So we have no recommendation now.
So basically the
So I'll-
motion fails.
I'll
So,
submit a motion that we submit a negative recommendation to city council for these exemptions.
do we have a second?
I'll second that if we can include in the motion our reasons
Okay,
because we believe that, I mean, I believe that it was approved with these setbacks and it follows the code. So that's why I'm voting. That's why I would vote in favor of the motion.
in favor of the negative,
No, I'm
Recommendation.
Making a motion, yeah,
Yeah.
in favor of the motion. His motion
Yes.
is.
So my
to
motion
provide a-
is to submit a negative recommendation to city council.
okay. So it has been moved and seconded that we send a negative
Recommendation.
suggestion, recommendation to the city council because of the point that the setbacks are already in the code and we don't want to change them. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but Kenny has to
Yeah.
accept that and change on his.
Yeah,
motion.
you, and I do. I mean, that's the primary driver for me. Any exception to the code should meet a pretty high bar criteria to me. And so,
Okay, so we would just say that's an amendment to your motion.
so yeah, so I can amend my motion to include in the
Whatever.
negative recommendation, the reasoning, because the code already exists with these side setbacks and we don't want to grant an exception to the code.
Okay,
All right. All in favor of that recommendation?
Aye.
Aye. Teresa,
What did you say?
Kenny,
Did you say aye?
Nan
I didn't hear you.
in favor. All opposed? Nay. Heather and Gavin.
okay.
So
That,
City council.
the city council can do what they want.
that puts a bow on it. Yep,
Okay,
thank you.
we appreciate your talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, let me find my stuff here. Let's move on to item number 2. Development review amendments, red line review. Scott, tell us about this.
Yeah, so I know we're short on time and we've been working on this for a bit. There are 2 documents in this folder, both of which were provided by the consultant who's helping us with this. Let me give you a little bit of an explanation as to where we are, how we've got here, and what we need left to do. So, you know,
And can you add why this is before us?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So the legislature, state of Utah passed SB 174, which required all municipalities, counties in the state to change their subdivision ordinances to a very specific, very uniform review process. The process basically takes what is normally a as long as needed process to get it right to a very truncated and robotic review of an application. And so this particular text amendment that is before us is to become compliant with the state requirements. It requires an awful lot of changes because it basically takes our process and at least cuts out a third, but it also quickens it by adding specific timelines and review cycles, capped review cycles. There's only a certain number of reviews that we are allowed to do as a city before we are bound to approve it. So all that said, the state said everyone in the state has to do this. And municipalities kind of started scratching their heads. We attended trainings through, the conference season, which is typically in the spring. Over the summer, there were some clarifications from some of our advocacy groups. So the Utah League of Cities and Towns, they've been kind of looking into this. They've also been opening up some dialogue with our legislature saying, hey, there's probably some unintended consequences here. We probably overshot the mark. And there's been a lot of dialogue in the interim, right? Meanwhile, communities have started to kind of look at this and say, okay, how are we going to go about this? We started putting pen to paper, looking at other communities to say, what is your interpretation of the legislation? There was some disagreement as to what the legislation said in some regards. And now here we are towards the end of the year with a deadline in February saying all communities that are required to have moderate income housing plans, which we are one, we have to have this in place by February 1st. And it basically boils down to, there's a very short amount of time for us to take care of all of this. The legislature has required it for everybody, and we are neck deep in making these changes to be compliant. Okay. The state also, when they passed the legislation, indicated that there would be technical assistance funding to support communities in their efforts to go through these text amendments and become compliant. That technical assistance didn't become available until November, with the deadline in February. So we said, you know what? There's free money. We had $14,000 we were eligible to receive. We had a consultant generally on board already through our general plan. Our general plan process already anticipates we'd be making changes to our code regardless. And so we said, look, our consultant is one of the approved consultants in this technical assistance pool. Let's go ahead and front load some of this work and let's take care of it now, because why not take advantage of the free money and the technical assistance? So this is what they have provided to us as a first stab. This is not complete. There's actually quite a few issues with this. I started reading through this and I realized, okay, this is probably a lot of cleanup. They're making a lot of changes to bring it into compliance and into best practices. But there's still some issues in here that don't meet the 174 requirements. When I first read through this, I was like, there's still a concept plan requirement. We can't even require a concept plan. So we've got to change a few things before this is ready to rock and roll. So looking at the schedule ahead of us, we have 2 meetings in January and it's due February 1st. There have been rumblings that the legislature is going to maybe change some of the timelines. We may be getting a little bit of a breather and some extended time, but that's not guaranteed. Our due date is still February 1st. So my hope and my intent is over the next couple of weeks, I'll work with the consultant on these red lines to make sure that we are in fact not missing anything. We'll bring it back to the Planning Commission, the first meeting in January for review, public hearing, and then the council will review it in late February for potential adoption in time for the February deadline.
Late January.
Correct. If we miss the deadline, I don't know that the state's going to come knocking down our door, but I think it's probably in our best interest to try to be compliant, knowing that the legislature is probably going to change some things and we're going to open this book right back up and make more changes after the fact.
Mhm.
So that's where we're at on this. There's a lot. You can probably, I don't know if you guys read through all of this. It's a bloodbath, but I am excited for a few things. It does clean up our ordinance. Right now our ordinance is probably double as long as it needs to be because it separates all of our commercial out from our residential.
Mhm.
And when you look at it side by side, the residential and the commercial, it's literally verbatim. There's like 2 paragraphs here or there that actually change that are specific to commercial. So I'm excited to get rid of all that extra fluff and truncate it and then just put those commercial specific requirements in line with the rest of the ordinance. There's also some really good updates to some of our definitions so that we're in the line with the state definitions. There's a lot of cleanup that I'm glad we're able to do with this technical assistance. But we do need to go through and just make sure we're actually hitting the mark with the state requirements for SB 174, but also those policy decisions that we've talked about over the last couple of meetings where we had some discretion to say, do we want to still have it with the Planning Commission and have the Planning Commission be our land use authority? Do we want to have a public hearing? Those types of things we'll make sure we bake in based on what we are actually allowed to decide in all of this. So that's where we're at. That's why we are at where we are. And we've got a lot to do in this next month. And we'll do our best. I'm hopeful that we'll be okay to get it done, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes as well. In addition to the land use code, so subdivision ordinance is part of our land use code. We have a whole separate regulatory document called our Design Standards Technical Manual. And it's basically an engineer nerd document that specifies all the technical details that the improvement plans, subdivision infrastructure has to abide by. What are the specs for sewer lines and water lines? And what are the specs for curb gutter sidewalk? All these things that are very specific. That's not in the land use code. That's in the technical manual. Those are the standards that they have to design their subdivisions to. We've got to update that because it's also considerably out of date, because in all of this process, when it goes live, we have to say what is and what is not a complete application. We have to ask for all this information up front. And as long as they give us all that information, we have 15 days to review it. So we got to be Johnny on the spot. And we have to have all of our code very well buttoned down, because any comments we make have to be tied directly to a code reference. So we can't make a comment unless it is in our code as a requirement. And we can't make a comment unless we reference the code. So a developer can go to the code and see what the requirement is, go back and make the update in their plans. And then we move on to the second phase of review. We only get 4 of those phases of review. And each iterative phase cannot go back to the beginning. The second phase, for example, can only review the changes that they made between the first and the second phase. So it forces us to march along, which makes that first phase of review all important so we don't miss anything. And that's why in the background, we're making all these updates to some of these technical documents, but also our application process, which in the past has all been on paper. And we've had just, a PDF that we send over to people that, to be quite honest, is very out of date. And we needed to get to a point where we have a very specific checklist that also corresponds with the changes we're making in the subdivision ordinance and in the design standard technical manual. So these are all these orchestrating parts and components that we're trying to put together in a quick amount of time. But it's also frustrating because we know it's going to change. It's so frustrating to get to the end and then have to go back and open it back up and maybe change something. But that's where we're at. We're glad to have the technical assistance. At least it's here, but it's very late. I mean, if the legislature really wanted people to make good on this, they probably should have opened that up back in March. But here we are. We're lucky enough to have been accepted by our consultant, and it's because we had that existing relationship with the general plan and that contract in place. They denied many people that came to them saying, hey, you're on the pool. You're one of the approved consultants. Can you guys help us? And they had to turn them down because there wasn't enough time for them to take care of everybody's needs. So there's several of those consultants on the list, but the ones that we're working with, they've had to turn down, they've had to turn down work because there's just not enough time to get it done, which a consultant never turns down work if it comes to them. They're happy to have a contract. So anyways, that's where we're at. I'm going to keep working with the consultant over the next couple of weeks and try to get this red line to where we can have a public hearing and a recommendation the 1st of January. Which comes to a question I have. Will everybody be here January 4th for this first meeting of the year? Do we have a quorum to ensure that tentative timeline can maybe work? So that's 3 weeks from today.
Scott, I don't know
What's
what
Kenny?
Yeah.
like,
You're off.
I'd assume that starting January, I would not be a member
You know
of
when they
this
take their oath?
commission anymore, but I will be, but I had assumed that means I will not be at this meeting on January 4th, but
Yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
we can serve in both capacities.
okay,
So
all right. Okay, so.
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's
Pick
not
your
what I want.
favorite.
No, that's a good point. We're one man down, so to speak.
What did Scott say? I didn't hear.
We're a man down, so yeah.
But I know the mayor is looking at appointing another commissioner. I just don't know what her timeline is on that.
Yeah, I actually spoke to the mayor today and she had extended an invitation to an individual who was not able to accept time commitment, issues. So I know it's on her mind. I know she's kind of looking through the options and those who've expressed interest, and hopefully we'll have a planning commissioner to fill your shoes within a reasonable amount of time, but it certainly won't be by January 4th because we'd have to appoint them during their meeting on the 3rd. And then we would have to get them trained with a minimum training required before they can participate in that first meeting, which would all have to happen within 24 hours. So, and then they would be making a decision on something they're totally unprepared to discuss or aware of. So,
Sounds like we'll have a quorum though, even
Yeah.
with
Okay.
the four here.
And then our next meeting's the 4th and then the 18th. Is that
yeah,
right?
so we'll actually talk about the agenda here or the meeting schedule here in a minute, but yeah, it would be on the 18th.
One question on this, so so I saw the language and I saw a lot of track changes.
Yeah.
The original language, that was generated by the consultant based on their survey of other work that's already been done, or?
The language that they're proposing to add.
Well, I know, I mean, there was an original document, but then someone started redlining.
That is our ordinance. That is
Yeah.
our subdivision ordinance.
So my question is, the original document, the source of that.
The unredlined
Yeah.
original
did that-
document.
Did the consultants bring that? Did they?
They probably just took our ordinance and printed it to PDF and then PDF transferred it to Word to work in for, they have software that I'm not quite sure what the software is. I've uploaded it now into Google Docs and Google Docs has their own formatting that kind of changes a few
Oh.
things.
So our document has the word municipality in it multiple times, it doesn't say city. Cause the
Oh.
changes went from municipality to city. And so I'm thinking, what's the origin of this document?
Well, that's a good
Is
question.
this our code? I didn't feel like our code.
I'll have to look into it. As I was reading through it, the code is the code, but they may have been changing some things. Is it all in the red lines or is it in the black lines, the unchanged text?
I don't know, if you, I don't know if this is what you have up, but.
Because this is all very familiar language. The red here is, these are new additions. What's hard is Google Docs, their formatting for red lines is not the same as Word. And so everything is red in Google Docs, even if it's proposed language, not stricken language. So it's a little bit different. So you can kind of see here, this is all stricken, but it's still red. So it is being stricken. Everything here is red, but it's being added.
Okay, I'm just interested, like, where the original, if the originals are code, great, I'll learn the new.
It all, I mean, that looks red.
When I read it, there weren't red boxes around those diagrams, for example, so I might have a different level.
I'll have to go back and look. I'm pretty sure it is our ordinance because we had talked about, do we just wholesale get rid of it and start writing just a fresh new ordinance? So there's really no red lines. We're just adopting the entire ordinance. Or do we stick with what we have and redline it to where we need it to be? And I think based on, if you look towards the very bottom, this is all existing language in our code. So
Okay,
like
great,
density
great.
determinant.
That's what I need. That's what I need. So this,
Okay.
they started with our code. They've made some red line changes to it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I need.
But it is interesting that you mentioned municipality versus city, because there may be an origin document that they're pulling from, injecting language in here that doesn't apply to us in some regards because.
Yeah, they've added a whole section and then edited the whole section.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll have to look at that with a fine tooth comb. Yeah, but further down, when we get into the commercial section, for example, it's just all stricken. Right here, so that, further down, all that.
So the stricken
So-
text is not just
The-
strike
The
through.
lines are stricken and
And the red is added. Yep.
the red words are not stricken that we see.
Yeah, if you download this to a Word document, it is the blue and the red, kind of like as you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
Makes it a little bit easier to read, at least, unless maybe you get used to it in this format and it's fine, but I'm just used to the blue and the red.
I'm red green colorblind, so.
Are you?
that's-
And so this red and yellow,
Yeah.
this red and yellow
just see the
is original stuff. Oh, it's still red. and
The yellow is highlighting for a comment.
What color is it? Gray?
So I,
There's red and yellow.
so I know in Word, there's the option of simple markup where it just makes it look like what it's gonna look like. I assume Google can do that too.
I don't think so. Google is a little bit more limited, and so that's why I haven't really dived into, because I just know Word is so much easier to read, but
Well, whatever you give us, I'll do my best to.
yeah.
I love it.
So I would not put any time and effort into really reading this yet. There's still quite a bit that needs to happen for this to feel like it's ready to say, here's what we're proposing. And that's what my task is between now and the 4th of January, which is just a great task to have over the holidays, right? But we'll get there.
But we should have it read by the 4th of January. too.
Yeah.
That means you can't take any days off.
It's not
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
true.
We can tell what to read and what not to, or what's there and what isn't.
Yeah. So that's where we're at. I wish that we were maybe further along, but at the same time, it's one of these things. It's like maybe the legislature is going to ditch this altogether because it's been such a controversial item. But
Or
we're-
at a minimum, you'd think they maybe grant an extension because
Correct.
Yeah.
they didn't even release the funding until way later.
Correct. I was kind of hoping, but
Well,
They're
they
in
don't
session
even-
by February 1st, so something could happen.
I think
that
it's one of
first
their
week.
first items of business, to be honest.
Okay,
Stinkers.
Okay, so that's that one.
okay. How about the guiding our growth survey results?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on this, and you may or may not have read through all this. I just wanted to
Read
kind of
through
put
some.
this out there for your recognition. What it does, I think the first thing maybe to go through is, well, let me just give you some context. This guiding our growth survey was put on, it was commissioned by the governor's office of planning and budget, and it was put on by Envision Utah. And they did a statewide survey of some key topics between land use, water, transportation, and open space. They did it over the entire state, but they also provided results that are county specific. So we can say, okay, what is the general temperature of the state's opinion on certain matters? Or what is our county, what are their opinions on certain matters? And I think it's just helpful as we embark in the general plan to kind of understand what the masses are thinking on some of these topics. We do hear a lot of folks come into planning commission with very strong opinions and, you know, one way or another on whatever topic we're looking at. But I think it's good to take a step back and see some of these broad data points to say, what is the overall consensus on some of these issues? So I won't go through this because it's quite detailed, but if you get a minute, what this did for me when I read through it is it kind of just confirmed that we see polar opposites in this chamber. We see very specific comments that are leaning very hard in one direction on a topic. And then, for example, the short-term rental discussion that we have people on very opposite sides of the spectrum. But when you take the aggregate and you take everybody on a large, statistically significant survey and say, okay, what is the actual true public opinion? It more than often is right in the middle, more often than not. But what's interesting about the land use side of these things is a lot of people, they want open space, but they also don't want, to grow outside only of their existing boundaries. They want to protect some of those outside areas, and they're okay with some growth in their internal existing areas. People generally want to conserve water. They want to conserve water in existing areas, but also new areas. They're not just saying, well, the new people can conserve, the new development conserve. Everybody was very on board with water conservation, just in every aspect, whether it's in the urban core, agricultural practices. Everybody was very on board with that. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is look at this, see where these public opinions are, because it might help in your thought processes as we start to look at the general plan. And we have, some of these public open houses where you're going to see a lot of public comment, and some public comments going to be very staunch in one direction and some and very staunch in another direction. But I think it's good just to understand where the broad idea is.
I read through it. I was surprised by a few items.
I was surprised too. And Part of the context that, like, I've knocked on a lot of doors in North Logan in the last 3 months, like to the point where in geographically different areas of the city where I think I have a statistically relevant sample set there. And what I heard talking to people does not necessarily jive with the Cache County output from the survey. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to reconcile that
Yeah,
because I believe the survey, it's just not what I was hearing out of people's mouths.
yeah.
And it wasn't.
So you wonder who they really surveyed.
Yeah, it wasn't, yeah. I mean, yeah, the survey response, I think I talked to more people than the number of people that were responding.
Yeah.
300, yeah, right. And I think I talked to more than 300 people, so.
Yeah, well, what I thought at the bottom of the Cache County specific, they do have demographics, because I was kind of curious too, like who are these respondents? And what I found was we've got a lot of millennials that this is county specific.
I was surprised. I thought there would be older. people.
Yeah, usually you see it's kind of skewed towards the older generation.
I think it's because it was an email survey, am I right?
It very well could have been that there's a technical component there. But they also did surveys in person. They did random surveying as well. It's not just an electronic survey. They did do some broad outreach to try to get different groups, but there might be some of that technical challenge that swayed it towards the middle.
Yeah. I think
younger
I got
groups.
the email for it, but I've just learned never to click on random emails telling me to click on a
I
link.
think,
Right.
I think I did it. I think I remember at 440, so.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It was also interesting to see that the majority of the respondents owned their property versus rented.
Yeah.
And then some of the choices that they were saying, like, no, it's okay to develop a little bit more in the town in order to preserve some outside. They want to just even uniform growth, not one extreme or the other. And then also, relatively educated respondent pool. So anyways, if you have time, read through these. It might kind of challenge your assumptions and what you've heard anecdotally from people just in conversation. And it's helpful just to kind of set your thoughts as you are contemplating our new general plan. So there's the guiding our growth, which was a statewide, but also there's data that's granular down to the county level. Some of these other things, the housing task force, this was a county specific Cache County task force made up of 50 different individuals. And the responses in this actually are pretty close to what the statewide guiding our growth responses were. That was interesting. What is a bit alarming, if you look at this performance audit that was done by the legislature. This is this one's a bit iffy, right? I mean, what it's talking about, some of the very broad first things that it's talking about is we're running out of time. The state should adopt state level measures and targets for housing needs and construction. The legislature could change local land use regulations to overcome regulatory limits on population growth. To encourage statewide housing goals, Utah could implement incentives and penalties for noncompliance, which they're already doing. Concerns about city compliance with specific requirements and timelines were largely unfounded. That's what I found was interesting. They thought we weren't being compliant, or they assumed we weren't being compliant, but that was largely unfounded. And yet they're still going down these ways to try to take away local control. And then you look at some of these recommendations, they are like, consider options to increase zoning density on a wide scale within the state. Force zoning changes on local. So this is very concerning as far as this policy is concerned, policy analysis.
Yeah.
So this kind of helps you understand what is going on at the state level, but also the public opinion on the state and also the county as well. So interesting to kind of see what's going on out there outside of just conversation. That's kind of what these are helping us see.
I grew up in Salt Lake. I don't want to live in Salt Lake. That's why I live here.
Correct.
But there, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So anyways, that's all I wanted to share on that.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
Okay, staff business discussion. 2023 Planning Commissioner Training.
Yeah, thank you. The majority of you are completely trained. We'll just leave it at that. So I appreciate you doing that. If you guys have time and are interested, the Utah League of Cities and Towns has what's called a newly elected officials crash course training. It's online. It's tomorrow, so short notice between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. And if you'd like to, if you have time to, it's a free resource. Feel free.
It's
You might-
Saturday, not tomorrow.
Saturday.
It's
Or is it tomorrow in the
16th.
Vegas room?
Feels like it should be tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah, in
this
person
one's
was
in
last
person.
week. This one's online this
Thank
Saturday.
you.
It's like, I swear.
I'm a day ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, Saturday. Yeah, it's online. It's free.
Yeah, it's $45.
Is it 45 bucks? I
Yeah.
thought it was free. If you'd like,
They made me pay $45 to register
did
for
they?
it.
I thought it was free. The
Yeah.
online, I thought the online was free. The in-person wasn't.
The in-person was $60.
If you'd like to attend, we do have some budget available for planning commissioner training. Let me know.
But in the earlier training, you had given a source of other online training, which is sufficient as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, this is just an option, especially around election season. Ken, you might find it helpful.
I registered for it.
Did you?
Are you talking about
Okay.
the one on Saturday?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'll be on Zoom
Cool.
for
4
4
hours.
hours.
4 hours. Yeah.
Paint your mouth.
So if I go to his house, does that count?
Yeah, it's free.
You're well, everyone's welcome.
back.
Come on, we'll have a party.
After you paid. He's front room.
Yeah, we'll all listen to Kenny Payne.
All right.
Sorry.
Last quick item, meeting dates for next year. I did this selfishly because I wanted to plan vacations. But I put together a calendar just so you guys are aware. Generally, we try to meet the first and third week of every month, but there are times throughout the year where we have traditionally had issues meeting that schedule. So just so that everybody can kind of set their gaze on the next year and kind of work around some of these things. This is kind of our anticipated schedule. And we can modify as needed, obviously, but you guys are able to maybe put this in your calendars, keep it in mind when you're looking at travel dates or whatever. So traditionally, April is jam-packed with conference season. That's kind of when Utah League of Cities and Towns has their conference. That's when the American Planning Association has their conference as well. Same with September. That's kind of when the fall conferences come running around. But then also like in July, 4th of July is usually a tough one. And then in December with the holidays. So we usually go down to a single meeting in those months. So.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
I already got them. That was good.
Yeah, that
Perfect.
was super helpful.
Okay. Well, if you guys have any questions, let us know, but that's what we anticipate doing.
So these are on the city council side too. These are pretty well set.
Yeah, the council reviewed this yesterday and we'll throw them into the city's calendar, but they may change. They're flexible. Okay. That's it. That's all I have.
That's it. Next meeting, January 4th. Kenny, we'll miss you.
I will miss the
I
commission
bet you
too.
Yeah, we're sad to see. you
Sure,
go.
Kenny, we believe you.
You notice your plaque's missing, so we got to make you a new one
Yeah,
for
little
city council.
stinker.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
But we appreciate you, Kenny.
Everyone else is here. It's just me then, huh? Okay, there we go.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
I can see I'm not wanted.
No, you're.
No,
really
we're,
fine.
you're leaving us.
Gavin wants to say something?
I just have one comment. Yeah, I just want to talk about like the process of how we did that meeting today. I would prefer if we could have the applicant do their presentation and then they sit down. And then we have the hearing, public hearing. And then we get to have our meeting, not with them as a participant. I
That's usually how we did it. We used to just, the developer or whoever does their bit.
yeah.
and you'll hear that happens, and then you'll-
Yeah.
It's totally up to you guys how you want to do that.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that's my preference would be that they get to have their piece and say their thing, but then it's our meeting. And if we're talking about things, we're back and forth. I don't want that interruption in that flow in that conversation. Then it's not his meeting. It's here to make an application to our meeting. So I would prefer if we did that.
Okay.
I don't know how how we enforce it or encourage that, but that'd be my.
I'm just here for
So
the,
it kind of comes down, I mean, you guys can discuss this and generally understand how, to expect a meeting to go, but it's up to the chair to kind of slam the gavel and say, here's how we're going to run this meeting.
you should have done it. This was the day.
Okay, but right now.
Oh.
to be done.
Man-
I need
man
a
holds
motion
power.
To close this meeting.
I motioned to close this meeting.
I move, so moved.
All right. Heather, motion to, Gavin seconded that we close this meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, one more time.